If you
I'm actually
have any
recording.
questions, that's okay, because they're really good. Kate is really good at editing out this stuff.
Oh, I'm learning as I go.
You're phenomenal. You are. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started here. Hi, I'm Kelly Shanahan, the Board of Directors of METAvivor. With me is Kate Watson, a fellow board member, and Dr. Danny Welch, who is near and dear to our METAvivor hearts. Dr. Welch is a professor at the University of Kansas and is a giant in the field of metastasis, and has written just seminal articles on the hallmark of metastases. So he was also the very, very first recipient of a METAvivor grant way back in 2009, which in this year of the pandemic, which feels like 1,000 years, seems like it really was a lifetime ago. But thanks to the work that Danny has done, we have learned so much more about metastasis. So Danny, if you would like to tell us a little bit about the work you do on metastases and what it meant to you 11, 12 years ago now to get that first METAvivor grant. And Danny is on our scientific advisory board and is one of the reasons that we fund such incredible research is because of advisors like Danny, who's been there from the beginning, helping us choose the best science.
Well, first, thank you, Kelly, for a very gracious introduction. And Kate, thank you for being part of the board. And just the opportunity to work with you and others has been inspiring in so many ways. What did it mean to me? I'll come back to what I do in a little bit, but what did it mean? I actually happened to bump into CJ, one of the early founders of METAvivor, when I gave a talk in Maryland, and she and I got to talking during that visit, and she had actually sought me out because she had looked on websites and found very few people that were studying metastasis, and the two of us got to talking and that type of thing. I think that was around 2007 or thereabouts. And the organization was mostly a support group for patients, not really doing much in the way of collecting money to fund research. And I invited CJ, and she became the first ever, as far as I know, advocate to be on a program at an AACR meeting. And she set up a table in front of the conference, and actually you can see it over my shoulder. Here is the poster from that meeting. And she just changed the entire complexion of this meeting on metastasis. And then when she said that the board was raising money and they would like to support some of the research, I just almost fell over because that just doesn't happen. And I think it was spurred by a wacky idea that I had pitched at that seminar that I gave, but I had also spoken at the same time at the National Cancer Institute about a metastasis suppressing gene that my lab had discovered called KISS1. Humorously named because we discovered it in Hershey, Pennsylvania. And what we found is that KISS1 blocks the last step in metastasis, but allows everything before that to happen. And that was eye-opening because about that time, people were starting to identify that tumor cells leave the tumor long before the tumor is detectable by current X-rays or CAT scans or MRIs. And so they've done all those early steps before the cancer is diagnosed. And if we could block it at the last step, we propose that one could render cancer a chronic controlled disease as opposed to an acute one that we have to eliminate every cell. And I was pretty much roundly booed off the stage as being unrealistic. And the MetaVivor organization said, no, we could live with that. We'd rather have it totally cured, but if we can have a normal lifespan, we could live with that. And we think that's worth trying. So it put wind in our sails at a time when others seem to be blowing wind in the opposite direction. So
Yeah, and that's great. And I think that's true. I think, Kate, yeah, I think Kate and I would rather we never had metastatic disease or that it could be completely cured. But if we could render it like diabetes, where you have to take a medication every day for the rest of your life, and your life span is close to normal, I'd happily do that. I don't know. What about you, Kate?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's the goal for all of these patients. I mean, we're willing to do the treatments and handle the medications as long as they're well tolerated. But my goal is to be here. I have young kids, and I was diagnosed young at only 35, and I want a normal lifespan. And so if this is exciting research that you think is going to get me there, sign me up, take my money. We'll happily keep supporting you. And it's an honor to be able to kind of hear from you directly, because you're such a great in the research world. And I don't think enough patients know that you've really been here from the beginning. And METAvivor is so lucky to have you as part of the group and one of our research champions. So thank you.
well, it's a partnership. It's not a, I'm not the only person who's learning from this interaction. So if you allow me to tell you some of the new stuff that we're doing with
Love to hear it.
some METAvivor support. As you both know, but some others may not, METAvivor's taken a keen interest in reducing racial disparities with regard to outcomes. And there is some level of controversy about what causes that. And there's clear data that access to medical care is one key component, but there's also a genetic component. Racial ancestry contributes to that. And inside cells, there are these little organelles called mitochondria. And Kelly knows this from medical school, but a lot of people
The powerhouse of the cell.
that they convert food into energy that the cell uses to make molecules and things like that. But most people don't know that they have their own genome. And that genome is inherited exclusively from your mother. And evolutionary biologists have shown that the mitochondria have sequences of DNA that can trace us all back to an ancestral Eve. So from a biblical perspective, but as humans migrated around the world, certain mutations began to be selected for in different places, and they can define race in people. Similar things have happened in mice, and so we made a mouse model that allowed us to study exclusively mitochondrial genetics. And we've done some studies recently that show that simple one nucleotide, one base of DNA in the mitochondria can either promote or inhibit metastasis in different strains of mice. And we're using that to model racial disparities in mice for metastatic development.
And for lay people out there, I'm going to use an analogy. So
Please.
These nucleotides are letters. There's only 4 letters that make up our DNA alphabet. So it would be like changing one letter in War and Peace and turning it into a National Lampoon or a Mad Libs.
Yes. The key difference is War and Peace would be like the nuclear genome, the one we all know about. The mitochondrial genome is like 3 pages from War and Peace. So it's going to be a whole lot easier to study and analyze. And I'm going to steal that analogy because that's the best way to explain things. So thank you for
or since it's a better one and since it's a smaller amount, it's like taking the Cliff Notes, changing one letter in the Cliff Notes of War and Peace and turning War and Peace into a comedy.
There you go. So
That's better. It's 5:30 in the morning for me, you know.
hey,
Give me a break.
she's already more brilliant at 5:30 than I am.
Kelly's the best. I love when she can break it down, because as a lay person myself, but an MBC patient, the simpler you can make it, the better I understand it, the more excited I get about it.
Yeah. So I try really hard to make it in common language, but I will say
maybe that's another reason why you named it KISS, not just because you were in Hershey, but you know the other acronym of that KISS is an acronym for.
Yeah. Well, the actual story there, I think you will find funny. There is a colleague of mine, a really good friend, Pat Stieg, who's at the National Cancer Institute. Pat discovered the first metastasis suppressor, and I happened to be in the lab the day she found it. I was just visiting her boss, and she and I exchanged information, emails and things for years after that. And when we found KISS-1, we had originally called it suppressor sequence, or SS1. And Pat wrote me a note and she goes, "You are a fool. Thank you. You love your colleagues when they say you're a fool." She goes, "SS1 is not memorable. You've got to give it a name that people will remember. Why don't you call it chocolate 1 since you're in Hershey?" And I said, "That's too many letters and I don't type well, but I'll put KI in front of it and call it that." So it's nice to know scientists do have a bit of a sense of humor. And Pat inspired me in multiple ways, both by renaming it as well as following the blazing trail she pioneered with suppressors. So I just have fun with that. But we're having a good time trying to figure out how these things work, even though it's slower than we'd ever hope.
So are you finding anything yet in the mitochondrial research that you're doing that could explain, we know that there's certainly that Black Americans, people of African ancestry, certainly have a much higher incidence of triple negative breast cancer than people of Northern European ancestry.
Yes. Without getting into the weeds, and also with the caveat that we're still really early in this, the mitochondrial DNA only encodes 36 genes. And most of those are for molecules called transfer RNAs, or tRNAs. And tRNAs are like shuttlecraft that carry amino acids to assemble proteins. And that's what their known function is. Well, within the last 10 years, maybe 12, people have recognized that tRNAs can get clipped into little fragments. They're called tRNA fragments. We're very clever with our naming system. And they do that very specifically. And we found 2 tRNA fragments that right now look like they could explain the differences in the metastatic ability. Allow me to turn around. This is are the comments that we just got back from the National Cancer Institute for a grant that we submitted to study those tRNA fragments. Unfortunately, the grant was not funded and will not be funded in its current form. They basically said, "Well, that sounds interesting, but you have to prove that they suppress metastasis before we'll fund you to study them." So without the METAvivor funding, we won't even be able to collect some of that data to do the about $2.5 million 5-year project that's proposed there. So,
and that's one thing, I think people look at our METAvivor grants, and people in the know are like, well, it's chump change you guys are funding, but you have to do some of these preliminary studies in order to get the big grants, the NIH R01s and all these other numbers and names that I don't even know what they are, but it seems like the higher up in the alphabet, the more money it is. So, but you have to you have to have this preliminary work. And that's one of the things I think that METAvivor does really well. I mean, would we like to be able to give $5-10 million grants, to fund a clinical trial? Yeah. So open up your pocketbooks, people watching this.
Yeah.
But what we do fund, the now $100,000 young investigator grants, the now $250,000 translational grants, they provide that seed money to get some of this preliminary data that the big boys, the NIH, the DoD, that they need, that they want, that they insist upon in order to give you, the big grants that will really propel your work forward.
I skeptically have said before that those big agencies don't fund research, they reimburse it. That's not entirely true, but you have to have the project in many ways well down the path. And a colleague of mine once referred to grants like those from METAvivor as the table stakes you need to get into the poker game of funding. If you don't have something to start, you can't get in. And so it's absolutely critical. And another thing that you mentioned some critical words from METAvivor too. It's funding young people. Even though the grant that I happen to have currently from METAvivor is in my name, it's paying a postdoctoral fellow who's just at the beginning of his career, so that he's actually able to do this. And what I can promise is once he leaves my lab for the next stage of his career, it will be 2 people studying this instead of 1. It'll be 2 labs, and he will train people, and then it'll expand out. So $100,000 grant is not trivial, but it multiplies with time and multiplies not only the data, but also the people who are tackling the problem of metastasis.
And one thing for our audience, I mentioned that Danny got our very first grant, and I don't even know if it was 50,000 back then. I think you got the very first grant. I think it was 50,000.
I think so.
He has been on our scientific advisory board ever since, and we do allow our scientific advisors to submit grants. Now, you might think that just because he is a dear friend of ours and has done so much for our organization, be like, sure, Danny, whatever you want. No, no, he has to go through the same exact, our scientific advisors go through the same exact process as any other researcher. He has to submit a grant application. It is reviewed. It's reviewed by people living with disease, people like me and Kate, and people that are not involved with our organization in other ways that review grants. And it is reviewed by other scientific advisors to make sure that, yeah, this is good science. This can lead to something that will help people with already metastasized disease. And I think that is vitally important because there are other organizations that have scientific advisory boards, and their scientific advisors don't always have to go through the same process that any other researcher has to. And we at METAvivor believe in transparency. And I have read some of Dr. Welch's grants in the past, and this is good science. It is exciting work.
Thank you for that. And I think that was one of the early discussions that I had with the board, is that it's really critically important that we not just rubber stamp something from people who are friends, because I've made plenty of mistakes in the past with research, and anybody who's honest will admit that. But with you develop a reputation for making better choices with time, and I think it's important that the board knows that, and anybody who donates. I donate to METAvivor because I know where the money goes. And I'm going to put in a plug. Well, I buy, just like almost everybody else, lots of things from Amazon. Every purchase, a percentage goes to METAvivor. So look at that if you think this is worthwhile. It's like an easy add-on.
Yeah, it's the smile.amazon.com where you can pick a charity, and a portion of all of your of everything you buy goes to the charity you pick. And I recently got an email, and I think the last year our donations from MetaVivor from Amazon were like 40 something thousand dollars, which is higher than they normally are.
Yeah,
And I think it's because, yeah,
that can fund grants right there, and
right.
it's not out of your pockets. It's tied to your purchase, so it's a win-win.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jeff Bezos can afford it. If he can ride a phallic rocket into space, his company can afford to take something off of their profit to donate to charity. I think the percentage should go up after his space trip. Kate, do you have?
I think we should ask Jeff to guarantee a free trip for the first patient cured of metastatic disease.
There you go.
We're up into space.
There you go. And he's actually starting to do finally some charitable work. So maybe we can try to get him to add METAvivor to his list of philanthropic efforts. Kate, do you have any questions? I
just have one question, kind of a lay person. The KISS-1 research that you're focused on, I get a lot of questions from people as to why my treatment is different than everybody else's. Is it focused kind of on metastatic breast cancer as a whole? Or is there a certain subset that you are anticipating that this research could potentially be a breakthrough for? Because I think it's so hard to explain, number one, metastatic breast cancer, and then subtypes, different treatment protocols, depending on where it's located in the breast. So I think just to give people an overview of who this research really could benefit, that kind of seems to be the question that I get when people want to know what kinds of things are METAvivor grants funding.
You've embedded a lot of questions in there, and they're all good and they're all important. So I'm going to try to sort of back up just a little bit. Every patient's tumor is unique. Mm-hmm. And that's the art of medicine. That the physician has to balance what's shared between one patient's tumor and another that molecularly look the same.
Yeah,
they're not. So that's one level of it. And then within breast cancer, I mean, back when I started, people just said, "Ooh, it's breast cancer," and then people made identification of the hormone receptors, and then added to that the HER2, which is kind of another hormone receptor. And now there are, I believe, 11 subtypes of breast cancer. The number varies, but and each one of them behaves differently. So that I think is a core to your question. Every tumor is going to be a little different.
Yeah, there's beasts within the overall beast kind of thing. Yes. That they tackle.
Yeah, which of those warriors are we, or the dangerous ones? Within the smallest tumor we can diagnose of 1 billion cells, it's estimated that only 1 out of every 10,000 cells might have the ability to metastasize. So even within a tumor, a really small percentage actually do this thing called metastasis. So we're trying to find the eye of the needle in a haystack, not just the needle in the haystack, it's the eye. So it's really critical. Another thing that you were mentioning that I think is important for people to understand, especially with donors, we discovered KISS-1 in melanoma, a skin cancer. We had no idea it was relevant in breast cancer. And now KISS-1 has been shown to play roles in lots of different kinds of cancer: pancreas, ovarian, prostate, breast, melanoma, and so on. So discoveries in one area of science or one tumor type can have impact in a lot of others. And that, I have to say, that was probably one of the hardest sales pitches I had to have to the METAvivor board, in the early days is to be willing to look at data somewhere else that might be applied to metastatic breast cancer. It's not, we're not taking away the focus on metastatic breast cancer. That's the focus. But to be willing to say, ooh, this over here in some weird area, if the rationale can be drawn and the connection, the dots can be connected, we don't want to ignore that. So,
Yeah, and this is another reason why when MetaVivor goes to Capitol
apology,
Hill,
these automatic lights just go off.
when we go to Capitol Hill, we don't just talk about the number of people with metastatic breast cancer. We talk about the number of people with metastatic cancers.
Yes.
And I think you just hit on this, Danny, that the mechanisms of metastasis, there are many common mechanisms, no matter where the cancer originated in the body. I always say to people, people like Kate and I, and all of us with metastatic breast cancer, we probably have more in common with someone with metastatic colon cancer or metastatic lung cancer than we do with early stage breast cancer patients on a lot of levels, in the stresses we face, in the challenges we face, and also in the biology of metastasis, that a lot of things are in common. So, we can learn a lot. With lung cancer, the first drug targeted for a particular KRAS mutation was just approved. Well, I have metastatic breast cancer and I have a KRAS mutation. So that work in the lung cancer field may come over to metastatic breast cancer. Things that we're finding in metastatic breast cancer may help with metastatic, melanoma. So, I think we need to look at metastasis research. Like you found with KISS1 originally in melanoma, has implications for breast cancer and other cancers as well.
Absolutely. And I just think, you've said something really important, and I'm going to say this for the person who is really a science geek and enjoys the science. My first interactions with CJ was focused on her just explaining to me the stigmatization that the metastatic patient feels. At this particular meeting, the one over my shoulder, I keep pointing to the wrong one, but I gave the introductory talk. I called it the M word, and I talked about the different things that metastatic patients experience, and the two of you understand this, the kind of marginalization, because some of your friends don't want to hurt your feelings, so they avoid you, and that it's not because they don't love you, but they're just afraid they'll say the wrong thing. And so letting them know that, yeah, you'll screw up and you'll say the wrong thing once in a while, it's still, you're still friends, and people need that. And what the last word I used, I remember trying to think of the way to end this on a positive note. I referred to metastatic breast cancer patients as my muse. Inspiring, and share your stories, continue to share them. One person at a time, that's all we can hope to change. But all of us are in this, and really every person we change can multiply that out to helping others. So I try and look at that philosophically as I'm growing longer of tooth. That's just what we all have to do. So I appreciate you guys more than I can express. I hope but it's hard to express.
We know that, but I hope you know that, like, we're never letting you retire. Like, you're gonna have to keep training smart young scientists who are passionate about studying metastasis like you are. And keep doing the amazing work that you're doing. Is there anything that you would like to end up with and telling us about your research or future directions or anything else, Danny?
I want to just emphasize, I am lucky. I get to train some of the smartest young people, and I'm very fortunate that I'm able to report to you. There are a lot of young superstars who are coming up the pipeline. And each year that METAvivor has grown its research budget, Stuart Martin and I, who originally were the two scientific people on the board, now it's expanding and so on, we have noticed a clear improvement in the quality of the grants, and the bad part is the number of people who are seeking funding is also going up at a very high rate. That's good news. More people want to study it. The bad news is we can't give enough to all of them to do everything that's promising. So I'm a glass half full kind of guy. So I am excited by the number of people, the quality of the science, but I also need to realize that half that glass isn't full.
Right.
And that's what we're here for.
Yeah, we need to fill it up with dollars. And that's one thing that happened in 2019. We review the grants, we get letters of intent, we invite some of the most promising ones to submit full applications. And then, we have some X amount of dollars that we've raised from January through early part of December when we are deciding which grants to fund. And then in 2019, I think it was the 10th anniversary, we raised a lot of money in December, thanks to you guys that are watching this. And we were able to fund additional grants, ones that we had looked at and was like, oh my God, this is so good, but we don't have quite enough money. And so the more money that we raise, the more promising science, the more promising young investigators, and the more promising seasoned investigators. I'm not going to call you old, Danny.
I appreciate that.
That we can fund. And I am incredibly proud of METAvivor that we funded $4.4 million in research in 2020 in the middle of the pandemic, when much larger, much more well-known organizations did not fund any new grants. So, and that's only because people continue to donate, and because we had good scientists wanting to do research that we could say to our supporters, there's going to be some great grants, there's going to be some amazing science, we can't let that fall by the wayside. And here we are in year 2 of the pandemic, and we will fund research again. We will, literally, Kate and all of our other friends, our lives depend on this. So, Dr. Welch, I may keep calling you Danny, and that is never a sign of disrespect. It is just because you are such a dear friend to our community, and we hold you in literally the highest esteem. So thank you for the work you have done. Thank you for the work you continue to do. And thank you for your support of METAvivor, because frankly, I don't think that if we had had a lesser person or lesser people in you and Dr. Stuart Martin advising us, we would not be where we are today. So thank you.
Well, and just for those on the line or listening, it's Dr. Shanahan as well. We put our pants on one leg at a time, just like everybody on this video. And that's one of the nice things about working with people like Kelly. We're down to earth. We're doing this because we think it's the right thing to do. We want to make an impact. And unfortunately, Kelly is living with metastatic disease. And I think,
but I always say I'm the dumb doctor, that us MDs are the dumb doctors, and the really smart doctors are the ones with the PhDs. And those ones that are MD PhDs, is like, dude, I don't know how you do that. So again, thank you. Yes. Thank you. And I couldn't put together a video and do the stuff that Kate does. So everybody has their skills, and METAvivor needs them all. So again, thank you so much for updating us on the work that you have done and you continue to do. And I am really hoping that we will be pulling up in the METAvivor mobile in 2022 with Kate behind the wheel to visit you.
But yeah, and I'm excited to get back to in-person stuff, and also to meet these amazing young researchers that you've got coming up behind you, because we need them to stay on board too. So
absolutely. One of the fun things is the first year the METAvivor van was going around the country. I had 4 METAvivor folks stay at my house, and we hosted a conference here in Kansas City. And people around town still have talked about that and how inspiring it was. So I don't know that I have the energy to keep up with the four more of you at the time, but I'm very willing to make that sacrifice. It was a blast for a couple of days. So.
Well, again, thank you so much, and thank you everyone who will be watching this after Kate edits it. And you know, we're going to keep on plugging along. We're going to keep funding research until metastatic breast cancer is a chronic disease.
Amen.